The air in the conference room feels thick and cold, smelling faintly of stale coffee and the nervous sweat clinging to the back of my neck. I watch him across the polished table. The man I married. The man I thought I knew. His face a mask of controlled confidence that I suddenly see through, like cheap glass. My boss, sitting at the head, leans forward, his gaze fixed on my husband. His words aren't loud, but they cut through the silence like shards of ice. He says, flatly, clinically, "Frank, let's be very clear. The only reason your position wasn't eliminated in the restructuring last quarter? It was purely because of your wife's performance metrics and her direct contribution to the Miller account. Her work, not yours." My husband's face, that confident mask, doesn't just crack. It shatters. I see a flicker of disbelief, then panic, raw and ugly, contorting his features. His eyes dart to me, wide and pleading, then back to the boss, searching for a lie, a joke, anything but the truth hanging heavy in the air. He opens his mouth, but no sound comes out. His hand goes to his chest, fingers splaying over his tie, and he begins to sway. Just a little at first, like a tree in a gentle breeze, but then harder, his eyes rolling back slightly. The color drains from his face, leaving it a pale, ashen gray. He makes a strange, choked sound, a sort of half-gasp, half-cough. Then, slow and heavy, like a felled oak, he begins to slide from his chair, collapsing in a heap on the expensive carpet. The sound is muffled but final. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. He walked into my life like a promise. Charming, attentive, saw me when others didn't. Or so I thought. We met at a friend's barbecue. Two engineers talking about the impossible beauty of bridge design over cheap beer and smoke. He worked in procurement for a mid-sized tech firm, a stable, unassuming job. I was just starting out at a larger, more cutthroat company, hungry and eager to prove myself. We built a life together, or at least, I thought we were building it together. Apartment first, small and noisy, then the quiet house with the garden we planned, but never quite got around to planting. Weekends were for hiking or lazy mornings, evenings for cooking together, talking about our days. He was always supportive, or seemed to be. He'd listen patiently when I talked about a difficult project, a challenging client, a demanding boss. He'd nod along, offer generic encouragement. "You've got this," he'd say. "You're the smartest one there." It felt good. It felt like teamwork. Partnership. My career trajectory started climbing faster than his. My company was merit-based, performance-driven. I put in the hours, I pushed myself, I learned voraciously. My first promotion came 2 years in. It was a significant jump, more money, more responsibility, a bigger title. I came home bursting with the news, ready to celebrate. He was happy, of course. Excited. We popped champagne. He told his friends. "My wife, she's really moving up. Got a big promotion." He sounded proud. I loved him for it. Then came the next promotion, quicker than the first. I landed a major project, delivered ahead of schedule, exceeded expectations. The raise was substantial. We talked about renovations, about finally planting that garden, maybe even starting to save for a down payment on a place closer to the city. Again, he was outwardly thrilled. But something shifted, subtle at first, like a change in the wind. When he told his friends this time, the emphasis felt different. "Yeah, another big step for us," he'd say. Or, "My planning, helping her strategize, it's really paid off." I'd catch these little phrases, dismiss them as him just trying to feel part of my success, part of our shared journey. A harmless way for him to puff out his chest a little among his peers. He was proud of me, and by extension, proud of us. That's what I told myself. It felt uncomfortable sometimes, a slight prickle under the skin, but I smoothed it over with a narrative of shared ambition. The real shift, the inciting incident that felt like a cold splash of water, happened about a year after my second promotion. We were at a dinner party with some of his colleagues and their spouses. The conversation drifted to work, as it often does. One of his colleagues mentioned a challenging client they were dealing with, a tricky negotiation. Frank, my husband, leaned back, took a sip of his wine, and said almost casually, "Oh yeah, we had a similar situation with the Miller account last year." Took some pretty sharp thinking to navigate that one, really turn it around. He then proceeded to describe, in vague but recognizable terms, the exact strategy one had developed and implemented for the Miller account, the one that directly led to my second promotion. My fork froze halfway in my mouth. I stared at him. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his colleague, nodding along, basking in the appreciative murmurs. He was telling my story, taking credit for my sharp thinking. It wasn't just implying shared success anymore. It was appropriation. My blood went cold. Later, in the car on the way home, I brought it up, trying to keep my voice calm, trying to understand. "Frank," I said, "at dinner, you talked about the Miller account. It sounded like you were saying you handled it." He looked surprised, then dismissive. "Oh, that? Just simplifying for them. You know how people get bored with the details. They understand we did it." He waved a hand, as if swatting away a fly. "Besides, we are a team, right? Your success is our success." Early struggles began there. I tried to talk to him, properly talk. I explained that taking credit for my work felt wrong, that it erased my effort, my intelligence. He became defensive. "You're being sensitive," he'd say. "I'm your husband. I support you. Of course, I talk about your work. We share everything." He'd twist my words, make me feel like I was the one with the problem, the one being ungrateful for his support. He'd point out how he listened, how he offered advice, usually generic and unhelpful, I now realized. It was gaslighting, though I didn't have the word for it then. It was just this pervasive sense that my reality was being subtly warped. My feelings were invalid. His actions were harmless, born of love, while my reactions were selfish, ungenerous. I started censoring myself, not talking about work as much, especially around his friends or family. The joy of my achievements began to curdle slightly, tainted by the knowledge that he saw them not as mine but as a resource for his own social currency. The rising challenges mounted slowly, insidiously. It wasn't just dinner parties. He started mentioning my projects, my insights, my successes, to anyone who would listen. Our neighbors, my own distant relatives, sometimes even people he barely knew. He'd frame it as what we're doing at work, or our latest breakthrough. The line between supporting me and claiming my accomplishments blurred into invisibility for him. He seemed genuinely to believe he was a co-author of my career. This wasn't just annoying, it started impacting my professional life in subtle ways. Colleagues who knew him socially would sometimes make comments like, "Oh, Frank told me about your strategy on Project X, sounds fascinating," and there would be this underlying assumption that he was somehow involved, that it was a shared effort, perhaps even primarily his idea that I was executing. It chipped away at my autonomy, at the clear recognition of my individual contribution. I felt a constant need to subtly reassert myself, to make sure the record was clear, without seeming insecure or, worse, disloyal to my husband. It was exhausting. Then came the really difficult period, the deepening crisis, where everything felt like it was falling apart. My company announced a major restructuring. Layoffs were coming. Departments were being evaluated, positions scrutinized. Performance metrics became more critical than ever. This was the time when my husband's job, the stable, unassuming one in procurement, suddenly felt less secure. His department was one of those heavily reviewed. And during this stressful period, his need to appropriate my success seemed to intensify. He started talking about my projects not just socially but in ways that hinted at his influence on them. He'd call my work our joint strategies, claiming we discussed them in detail, that he offered critical feedback that shaped my approach. It was a lie. Our work conversations were superficial at best, usually him asking, "How was your day?" and me giving a brief, sanitized summary. He started bringing it up more frequently, more forcefully, even in front of my colleagues or my own friends who knew how independent my work was. It felt like he was building a public narrative, a false history, where he was the quiet strategic partner behind my rising career. He wasn't just stealing credit. He was trying to weave himself into the fabric of my professional identity. I confronted him again, harder this time. I told him he was jeopardizing my reputation, making me look like I wasn't capable on my own. He exploded. accused me of being selfish, of not supporting him when he was under pressure. He said I was trying to diminish his role in our life, trying to pretend I did it all alone. He made it about our marriage, about my supposed lack of appreciation for his unwavering support. The fight was brutal, ugly. He twisted everything, made me feel like the villain. I ended up retreating, battered and confused, questioning my own sanity. Maybe I was being unfair? Maybe he did offer support I wasn't acknowledging? Maybe his way of coping with his own job insecurity was to inflate his importance in my life? I felt lost, trapped in a web of his lies and my own self-doubt. One evening, slumped on the couch, scrolling aimlessly, I stumbled across an article about imposter syndrome. It wasn't the article itself that mattered, but a linked piece about how manipulators exploit self-doubt. It described, with chilling accuracy, the pattern of gaslighting, of subtly undermining a partner's confidence while claiming their achievements. It was like a light switch flipped in a dark room. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't ungrateful. He was doing this deliberately. Maybe not consciously malicious at first, but it had evolved into something predatory. He saw my success, felt threatened by it, and rather than elevate himself, he sought to pull me down, to make my achievements his own. It was a sick, parasitic dynamic. This was the midpoint shift, the emotional realization that changed everything. I stopped trying to talk to him, to make him understand, to get him to admit what he was doing. You can't reason with someone whose reality is built on lies. You have to dismantle the lie. I needed proof. Not for him, he'd never admit it, but for myself and maybe, just maybe, for the people who mattered professionally. I needed a strategy. His strength, or what he perceived as his strength, was his public performance, his ability to weave a convincing fiction. My strength was the truth, the verifiable facts of my work. Paper trails, as they say, are more powerful than emotions, or certainly more powerful than his emotionally manipulative lies. The deepening crisis reached its nadir a few weeks before the scene in the conference room. My direct manager, a woman I respected immensely, pulled me aside. She looked uncomfortable. She mentioned, very delicately, that she'd had a conversation with Frank at a company's social event, one I hadn't attended. He had, apparently, talked at length about the joint effort behind my recent successful pitch to a potential new client, hinting strongly that his business acumen had been crucial. My manager knew my work. She knew I operated autonomously. But the seed of doubt, however small, had been planted. She asked me questions about my process, questions she'd never asked before, with a new, scrutinizing glint in her eye. It was devastating. His lies weren't just hurting me personally. They were beginning to erode the professional trust one had worked so hard to build. Everything felt precarious. My job, which had been a source of pride and stability, now felt threatened by his toxic behavior. I felt utterly alone, trapped in a marriage with a man who was actively sabotaging me, and powerless to stop him. The walls were closing in. The turning point came that night. I sat in the dark living room long after Frank had gone to bed, the silence of the house amplifying the chaos in my head. I could leave him. That was an option. But that wouldn't erase the damage he was doing, the narrative he was building. It wouldn't restore the trust his lies had shaken. I didn't just want out. I wanted vindication. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. He had used my success to build his false narrative. I would use his desperation to expose it. He was sweating his job review, pushing his fabricated narrative harder than ever, clearly hoping it would somehow justify his continued employment. He had just started implying, openly now, to anyone who would listen, that his strategic input was why I was excelling and that he was crucial to my value to the company, therefore indispensable himself. It was a twisted, last-ditch effort to link his fate to mine, leveraging my success to save himself. I knew my boss was conducting individual performance reviews, including Frank's, ahead of the final restructuring decisions. Frank was lobbying hard, talking to anyone he thought had influence, amplifying his fabricated story about his crucial role in my success. This was his mistake. He was pointing the spotlight directly at the lie. My plan formed slowly, cold and precise, like forging iron. I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't argue. I would provide the truth, unvarnished, directly to the source that held the power. Over the next few days, working discreetly, I compiled a file. Not about our marriage, not about his lies at dinner parties. This was strictly professional. It contained detailed project timelines for every major initiative I had led, cross-referenced with email timestamps, meeting minutes, and client testimonials that specifically referenced my contributions. It included internal communications where I outlined strategies, documented my decisions, and reported on progress, all clearly originating from me, executed by me and my team. It was a meticulously built edifice of fact, a paper trail that spoke louder than any boastful lie. I requested a private meeting with my boss, the same one who would be reviewing Frank. I didn't make accusations about my husband directly. I simply stated that, given the sensitivity of the restructuring and the importance of clear reporting lines and individual contributions, I felt it was necessary to provide a comprehensive overview of my projects and responsibilities, ensuring there were no ambiguities regarding my sole ownership and execution of these critical initiatives. I presented the file. My boss was initially curious, then increasingly impressed, and finally, I think, understanding. He was smart. He read between the lines. He saw the concrete evidence of my independent work, the clear timeline that showed no room for the kind of joint strategy Frank was peddling. He asked a few pointed questions, not about Frank, but about the challenges I faced, the resources I needed, reinforcing the picture of my solitary effort at the helm of these projects. He saw my value, documented and undeniable. He also saw the implicit contrast with whatever narrative Frank was trying to weave. Then came the invitation. An email from my boss. A meeting requested with both of us, Frank and me, to discuss synergies and future planning between our departments. Frank was jubilant. He saw it as his lobbying paying off, his chance to shine, to present our united front, and his crucial behind-the-scenes role to my boss directly, solidifying his position. He spent the evening before the meeting talking about our presentation, our talking points, our strategy for the meeting. He was completely blind. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He was walking into a trap of his own making, sprung by the truth I had quietly placed in the right hands. I said nothing. I just watched him, a cold knot of anticipation tightening in my stomach. Which brings me back to the conference room. The cold air, the stale coffee, the bright, unforgiving light. Frank, full of bluster moments before, ready to launch into his practiced performance of being the strategic mastermind behind his wife's success. My boss, calm, direct, holding the file I had given him, its contents now fully absorbed, fully understood. The boss's words are still echoing in the sudden, terrible silence after Frank collapses. The sound of his body hitting the floor is less a thud and more a heavy, rustling slump, followed by silence. Frank lies there, sprawled awkwardly, tie askew, face a horrifying shade of gray. His eyes are closed, his breathing shallow and ragged. I don't rush to his side. I don't feel a surge of wifely concern. I feel disconnected. Like I'm watching a play where the main actor just unexpectedly fell off the stage. There's a moment of stunned silence. My boss looks startled, then his professional demeanor snaps back into place. He's already reaching for his phone. Security, he says into the receiver, his voice sharp and efficient. Medical emergency in conference room C. Send help. He hangs up and looks at me. His expression is unreadable. I just stand there, rooted to the spot, watching the man who systematically dismantled my sense of self now physically collapsing under the weight of the truth. He built his shaky tower on my foundation, and when that foundation was revealed as purely mine, with no room for his claim, the tower crumbled, taking him with it. It wasn't just that my boss said I was the reason he kept his job. It was the absolute, undeniable certainty in his voice, the quiet power of the documented truth I had provided that backed it up. Frank wasn't just exposed. He was erased from the narrative he had desperately tried to insert himself into. The man who claimed my mind as his own had his own mind and body fail him in the most public, humiliating way imaginable. He was blindsided because he truly believed his lie was impenetrable, that I was a resource for him to exploit without consequence. He never saw the quiet, meticulous work I was doing behind the scenes, not on projects, but on assembling the undeniable evidence of his fraud. He was so focused on performing his lie, he never noticed me gathering the facts that would dismantle him. And the boss, armed with those facts, delivered the fatal blow. The victory wasn't just keeping my job or getting recognition. It was the complete, public, undeniable shattering of his false reality, orchestrated by my own hand. It felt cold, satisfying in a deeply unsettling way. Paramedics arrive quickly. The room fills with their calm, efficient energy. They assess Frank, talk in low, medical voices. They get him onto a stretcher, hook up monitors. My boss stands by, directing things with quiet authority. I just watch. It's like watching a stranger being tended to. This man who shared my bed, my home, my life, now just a medical emergency, a consequence of his own deceit. After they take him away, sirens wailing faintly in the distance, the silence descends again, heavier this time. My boss looks at me. There are no words of comfort, no apologies for the scene. Just a long, level gaze. Your performance, he says, his voice back to its normal tone, perhaps a shade softer now, speaks for itself. The restructuring decisions stand. It's his oblique way of confirming what he said before, confirming my value, confirming that Frank's fate is entirely separate from mine, and that my value is the reason he's not currently looking for a new job himself. The aftermath is a blur of logistics and sterile emotion. The company is discreet. It's framed internally as a medical incident. Frank is in the hospital. He had a stress-induced collapse, they say. His job is, unsurprisingly, terminated shortly after. The marriage? It didn't survive the collapse. How could it? The foundation was gone, revealed as built on lies and theft. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches after that conference room. Just a quiet, mutual understanding that it was over. I packed my things. He went to stay with family after the hospital. The house felt vast and empty. Winning felt complicated. I kept my job. My reputation, momentarily shadowed by his lies, was now clearer than ever. My boss, and presumably others in management, saw my capabilities without the filter of his false claims. I was secure. But the cost was the marriage, the shared life, however flawed it had become. There was no triumphant feeling, just a profound, bone-deep weariness. The betrayal had cut deep, left scars I suspect will take a long time to fade. The victory was cold, clinical, a demolition rather than a construction. I dismantled him, brick by brick of truth, and he fell. And in the quiet aftermath, I stand alone, amidst the rubble of what was supposed to be our life, holding the blueprints of the life I saved, my own. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.